Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off today. Right now on Morning News Now, put to the test. New COVID quarantine guidelines by the CDC raising questions this morning. Some of the nation's biggest school districts update their own policies, opting for testing over isolation to keep kids in class.
Schools have been incredibly safe. We want a smooth return to school. We want our kids in school. We want to make sure they're safe. We think this approach is the right way to do it.
This morning, new COVID cases and hospitalizations keep going up. Our team of correspondents is here to break it all down. Plus, we'll check in with a doctor from one state that just reached 1 million cases. Travel trouble, another day of delays and cancellations, not just at airports, but on the road. A 1-2 punch of COVID and extreme weather. We'll show you the conditions that are leaving tens of thousands of travelers still trying to get home after Christmas. In remembrance, the world of sports and politics both mourning two major losses. The NFL announcing the death of John Madden, the one-time player turned Hall of Fame coach turned broadcasting legend and video game icon, passing away at 85 years old. We'll look back at his extraordinary career. And Reid, the Senate giant who helped pass the Affordable Care Act, lead the Democratic Party for more than a decade, has died after a battle with cancer. He was 82. More on his life and legacy on Capitol Hill and beyond. And new year, same trends? Like it or not, 2022 is shaping up to look a lot like 2021. From the COVID crisis to supply chain shortages and working from home. We're going to check in with a trend spotter for what else we can expect as we ring in the new year. Plus, the one word she says will sum up 2022. Good to have you with us. It's not a word, but rather a number that's making headlines this morning. NBC News confirms 53 million COVID cases have been reported in the U.S. since the pandemic began nearly 2 years ago. Here's another sobering number. The 7-day average for daily cases in the U.S. topped 262,000 on Tuesday. That's a record. The previous record was set back in January. The CDC is also making a major adjustment to its estimate of how quickly the Omicron variant is spreading. According to the agency's new estimates, Omicron accounts for 59% of all cases, down from 73% 2 weeks ago. Some health experts are also wary of the CDC's new guidance to shorten isolation periods for people with COVID. With kids headed back to school and hospitalization rates on the rise, some worry the new policy may lead to yet another serious wave. We have our team of experts standing by to break this all down for us, including NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton with a closer look at COVID and college campuses, and Dr. Amina Akhtar with more on COVID in Missouri. But first, NBC's Heidi Presbella joins us from Washington. So, Heidi, concerning stat out from New York City this morning, a 400% increase in hospitalization rates among kids. New York right now is the epicenter for the spread of Omicron. What is Mayor Bill de Blasio saying about the plan that he's put in place to try and keep kids in school, especially since so many kids do remain unvaccinated?
Yeah, some pretty concerning numbers, Joe, but the mayor saying that despite that, they are going to try to keep kids safe in school, that they know that school is the safest place for kids. So they're going to create essentially a testing dragnet, doubling the number of tests that the state is sending out to schools. They're directing 2 million tests. And here's how the mayor says that this is all going to work, Joe. Take a listen.
First of all, it comes with wide distribution of at-home test kits to every classroom. And when there's a positive case in a classroom, every child takes home at-home test kits. Every child who tests negative comes back to school. It's as simple as that. So long as they're asymptomatic and so long as they continue to test negative, they keep coming to school.
So asked if schools should close, businesses should close, the mayor said, no, no, no. This is what I learned. Do not do that. But it also underscores the important role here, if you look how New York is implementing this, of state and local governments. The mayor appeared with the governor because a lot of this is coming from the state in terms of the tests, in terms of the manpower to administer them, and also read the results to make this all work, Joe.
Heidi, you spoke with the chief executive of the National Association of Secondary School Principals about these Test to Stay programs. Does he think they'll be successful? Any potential roadblocks?
Well, look, there's a lot of roadblocks because the schools that have all done this, the districts that have done this successfully so far, planned this months in advance. We talked to an outside group, for instance, that surveyed schools just before the holiday break, and they said of 100 large urban school districts, only 13, Joe, were planning to do Test to Stay. This is very resource heavy, very manpower heavy in order to pull this off. They did this in New York because they got help from the state. But here are the concerns from the head of a principals association who's been talking to principals all over during the break.
It is a tall order. This is a lot of testing. And other places that have done this kind of testing everywhere, you've seen across the country where businesses and others have done this, it has been a massive effort. And again, I just want to remind people that, like, principals and teachers and school staff should be focused on teaching kids and making sure that they're well, like providing them with the kinds of supports that they need to find their way through the pandemic.
So we heard from the mayor of New York, Joe, and that's making headlines because that's an exception. Many school districts are not publicly addressing the variant or saying that they're going to really step up the approaches that they've had to controlling COVID in schools. Part of the issue here is that billions of dollars did flow from the federal government to these schools, but the government didn't say, here's how you have to spend the money. You have to buy all of these rapid tests, even if the tests were available, because as you know, we're facing some shortages out there. So a lot of schools at this point are just taking a wait and see attitude.
Heidi, throughout the year, we've seen school districts debate mask mandates and vaccination. So quickly, how prepared are schools now for the spread of Omicron?
Well, look, most of them are just keeping the basic hygiene procedures that they've had in place. Some of them that loosened mask restrictions before Omicron are reinstating those. But right now, we're really just seeing a continuation of the approaches that we saw previously. Now, the mayor said 98% of close contacts don't turn into positive cases, but as is the case throughout this entire pandemic, we're always making these decisions based on the chemistry of the previous variant. Joe?
Things are always changing. Heidi, thanks so much for kicking us off this hour. College campuses are also feeling Omicron's impact as schools prepare for their spring semesters. A number of institutions have been forced to go back to the drawing board in terms of how they handle the new variant. That means a return to policies from the earlier days of the pandemic, like remote learning. And as you can imagine, many students are disappointed and frustrated by those changes. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins us now from Harvard University's campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Antonia, good morning to you. So walk us through how some schools are changing their plans for the spring semester and moving toward virtual learning, hoping that that might stop the spread of Omicron.
Good morning, Joe. What we're really looking at is a patchwork of policies at schools all over the country. And this is as administrators are really hustling right now to get the spread of Omicron under control on their campuses and to try to take action throughout January so they can preserve as much of the normal student life and student programming as possible for the rest of the spring term. So here at Harvard, they're going virtual for all of their January term. That's about 3 weeks. They're going to have dining halls go grab and go food only, and they're requiring all staff, faculty, and students to show proof of booster shots. And many schools are doing the same. The University of California system, most of the schools there are going to be virtual for the first 2 weeks, although they'll have more food and dining options available for students than Harvard is planning to. Then you have schools like Northwestern, where they're going to be virtual and asking students to test before they come back to campus and again when they get to campus. But then, you have schools like the University of Missouri, where they don't have a vaccine or a mask requirement right now. And then other schools like the UMass system or University of Michigan, where they are requiring vaccines and boosters, but they are not going to change any of their in-person plans. They want school to look normal as January gets started. So we're really looking at a patchwork system here, and students are heading back to school with very different strategies in place, Joe.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, Antonio. We know these decisions made by college leaders obviously impact the students a lot. What do they have to say about returning to virtual learning in places where that's happening?
Well, many of the students who are facing virtual learning say that they are disappointed, they're frustrated, but not particularly surprised. I mean, here at Harvard in the days leading up to their holiday break, they were setting records for case numbers here on campus. Students were going off into isolation and in some cases missing out on the opportunity to see their families for Christmas. And so many of those students that I've spoken to say that while they're sad that J-term is going to go all online, they kind of saw it coming. And then there are other schools like the University of Michigan where students actually took it upon themselves to write a letter to the administration asking them to please keep in-person learning in place. This is after faculty and other staff members there wrote to the school asking for them to go virtual for the start of the semester, and students there pushed back. Take a listen to some of my conversations with these students.
I was expecting to be in Cambridge, in the classroom. I've since canceled my flight. I'm going to stay in Atlanta with my family. We're going to have to fight for bandwidth and for quiet space and, just kind of manage what it was like back in quarantine all over again.
Being in person is just a huge benefit to everyone. Mental health with lockdown is not good for anyone, especially people who are struggling at our age. They're starting to develop new feelings, and being in person and having everyone around, you just feel more a part of the university. It feels like you're a part of something bigger than yourself.
The one thing that all the students I've spoken to agree on is that they feel that their educational experience, whether it's at the undergrad or graduate level, has sort of been forever changed at this point. And all of them are kind of going through the process this winter of coming to terms with the fact that they thought maybe 2022 would be more normal, would be like what college was like, say, 3 or 4 years ago. And they're now accepting that they're going to have to continue rolling with the punches.
Yeah, for so many of these students, it's been 2 years of just an absolute roller coaster of their college experience. Antonia, thanks so much for your reporting. Appreciate it. Let's bring in Dr. Amina Akhtar for more. She's an infectious disease specialist and chief medical officer at Mercy Hospital South in St. Louis. Doctor, good to have you with us. Let's start with cases in Missouri. Your state has now recorded more than 1 million cases of COVID since the start of the pandemic. You're likely just starting to see the impact of Omicron there, but what are you seeing inside your hospital?
Hi, good morning. What we are starting to see is a rapid increase in number of cases. And every time we've seen this virus surge, we've learned a different story about it. And right now, the quickness with which we're seeing cases and the velocity is like something we had never seen before. We've had almost a 20% increase in hospital admissions in the last 7 days, which really puts a stress on our healthcare system.
Knowing there's a chance things are going to go up even more in the days after the holidays, what is your main message right now to people in your area there in Missouri?
The message has been consistent, and what we would like people to do is if you have not been immunized, that's the best thing that we can do as a community to stop the spread and protect ourselves. And for those who are immunized, it's that getting that booster dose if you're due for it. And then back to the basic health measures in terms of prevention, the masking, the hand washing, all of those work, and all of those will help limit the impact this has during the upcoming months.
While we have you, I want to ask you about a new study. It suggests that for people who get infected with Omicron and recover from it, that it may actually defend against the Delta variant in the future. Help us understand why that's important, what that could mean for the long-term fight against COVID.
Anytime your body is exposed to an infectious agent, it has a chance to develop immunity. And as we learn more, there may be some cross immunity within the different variants that add protection, which is exciting news, but still it's not enough to protect yourself. And again, the vaccines are the best resources in achieving a level of immunity that is protective against these variants.
Dr. Amina Akhtar, thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Anger and outrage this morning from the family of the 14-year-old girl killed by a stray bullet in Los Angeles. They're now speaking out for the first time and calling for justice. The girl was inadvertently killed when a police officer opened fire on a man who was attacking another customer. Note to our viewers, you may find some of the footage disturbing. Here's NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda.
Valentina, life matters.
A growing outcry for justice.
Never should this 14-year-old little girl ended up as collateral damage.
After a 14-year-old was inadvertently shot and killed by police who were pursuing an assault suspect at a North Hollywood store. Valentina Orellana Peralta died in her mother's arms while dress shopping just 2 days before Christmas.
Hija mía, te amo.
Heartbroken parents mourning their loss.
Tenía grandes sueños.
The Los Angeles Police Department releasing body cam and store security video this week, revealing the tense moments before the shooting.
He's breaking things.
The suspect with a bike and heavy-duty cable lock seen acting strangely inside a Burlington store last week before attacking several women. A frantic evacuation.
Evacuate the building.
911 calls capturing the chaos and conflicting reports of what weapon the man was carrying. One victim brutally beaten, a trail of blood leading police officers to her.
Victim down! Victim down!
As they moved in, repeated calls among the force to slow down. And then 3 shots. An officer striking the suspect, 24-year-old Daniel Elena Lopez. But police say one of the bullets ricocheted off the ground and pierced a wall.
Unbeknownst to the officers, a 14-year-old girl was in the changing room behind a wall.
The tragedy calling police tactics into question.
These officers that went inside the Burlington Coat Factory were faced with what we call some of the characteristics of a crisis, which are uncertainty. They're making decisions based on confusing, ambiguous, and sometimes even conflicting information.
A multi-agency investigation is underway, and authorities say it will take months. In the meantime, the police officer who fired the fatal shots has been placed on administrative leave.
Emily, thank you. We're getting new information this morning on that deadly shooting spree in the Denver area. Police say a 5th victim of the shooting rampage Monday night has now died. Investigators say the gunman, who has now been identified as 47-year-old Lyndon James McLeod, was targeting specific people during the spree, although police have not yet said why he was targeting these people. One piece of good news, the Lakewood police officer who was injured in the shooting underwent surgery and is now in stable condition this morning. The travel chaos that started with the holidays is now turning into a week-long odyssey for some people. Staffing shortages, winter weather, and the spread of the Omicron variant have created a nightmare scenario for some travelers desperate to get back home. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is outside of LAX with the latest.
Yeah, hey, Joe, delays, disruptions, cancellations, all plaguing U.S. air travel right now. There were 1,100 cancellations for domestic flights yesterday alone, and this is all expected to continue well into the new year.
The holiday travel nightmare that kicked off this weekend now creeping into the middle of the week as airports in Seattle and Chicago deal with dangerous weather, and New York, Denver, and LA airports continue to see heavy delays.
Yeah, I was supposed to have a flight out of here at 7:50, and they canceled it, and I'm here for 12 hours.
On Tuesday, over 1,100 U.S. flights were canceled, with thousands more delayed. Delta Airlines saying employees are working, quote, around the clock to reroute and substitute aircraft and crews, citing winter weather and Omicron for the problems. So what can you do if you're one of the many travelers whose plans are being disrupted? If you're already at the airport, get online and get on the phone. You'll want to talk to an airline representative as quickly as possible. If your flight is canceled, you can get on a later flight, or if you decide not to travel, you're entitled to a full refund under federal law. A refund may also be available if the carrier significantly delays your flight. But amid the travel chaos, one story is more bizarre than any delay.
It was a crazy experience.
School teacher Marisa Fatia was on her way to Iceland when she tested positive for COVID-19 during her flight.
I started having a severe sore throat. And so I just took my rapid test and I brought it into the bathroom, and within what felt like 2 seconds, there were 2 lines.
A flight attendant assisted Marisa, who opted to stay isolated in a tiny airplane bathroom for the remainder of the flight, 4 hours.
There's like 150 people on this flight. And my biggest fear was giving it to them.
And during Marisa's quarantine at an Iceland hotel, a Christmas gift from her cool-headed flight attendant.
And she brought me flowers and a little Christmas tree with lights so I could hang it. It was so heartfelt, and she's just an angel.
And there you have it, a little good news amid all this holiday travel craziness. Meanwhile, there is reason to believe that the airlines will catch up to the holiday travel crush. But already this morning, we're seeing more than 300 cancellations for domestic flights. So certainly this is a headache that isn't going anywhere. Joe?
Hopefully some more angels are out there to help those stranded. Steve Patterson, thanks so much. With that, let's get a check on your morning news now weather. Michelle Grossman is back with us this morning. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. And we are looking at very active weather today. We're looking at a severe weather threat as we go throughout the afternoon and evening hours. So 16 million at risk for damaging winds, also large hail, even a few tornadoes. Where you see this orange here, that's an enhanced risk. It's 3 out of 5 on the Storm Prediction Center scale. So we're looking from eastern Arkansas, northern Mississippi, Alabama into Tennessee, where we could see some strong thunderstorms later on this evening and afternoon hours. So rainfall forecast, we could see some localized flooding as well. Up to 3 inches in some spots. That's where you see the darker colors, the oranges, the reds, the yellows. Now, as we go throughout time here, this is what the setup looks like. We have that warm air in place. Remember, it feels like spring in so many spots. That's the fuel, so to speak. And then we have that cold front moving through, and that's going to be the match that could spark some storms as we go throughout the later part of today. And then that threat moves to the east tomorrow. We could see some light rain, even a wintry mix on the cold side of this storm. So once again, record-shattering temperatures again today. 85 in Corpus Christi, 82 in Baton Rouge. That will stay in place tomorrow. We're going to see more October-like temperatures, 77 in Pensacola, 73 in Raleigh. And this will stay in place throughout the holiday weekend, and so will the storm chances as we go throughout Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Also, Joe, we're ending with some winter alerts because the snow continues to fall in the west. We could see 1 to 2 feet in the highest tops of the mountains there.
All right, Michelle, thanks so much. Tributes are pouring in this morning for Harry Reid. The former Senate Majority Leader died yesterday at age 82 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. He represented the state of Nevada for 3 decades, becoming one of the most powerful figures in the Democratic Party and on Capitol Hill. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins me this morning with more. Ali, so Reid didn't always seem to love being in front of the camera, but behind the scenes, he was known as a shrewd political operator, powerful. Talk a little bit about his legacy that he leaves behind in Washington and a little bit about what we're hearing from those who knew him.
Yeah, Joe, a man who rose from Searchlight, Nevada, all the way to the top echelons of power in Washington, D.C. He's someone who, over the course of his long political career, elevated his home state of Nevada to the national stage and also fought for key issues over his tenure, both as majority leader and as a man in the Senate, helping to pass President Barack Obama's signature health care proposal, the Affordable Care Act. Someone joked in remembering him last night that it should as much be called the Harry Reid Health Care Act as much as it's called Obamacare because of the role that he played in that signature piece of legislation. And you're right, commemorations from him are pouring in throughout Washington from people on both sides of the aisle. President Joe Biden, who served in the Senate with him, remembered him saying, "I've had the honor of serving with some of the all-time great Senate majority leaders in our history. Harry Reid was one of them." Biden went on to say, for Harry, it wasn't about power for power's sake. It was about the power to do right for the people. And the man that Biden was vice president to, President Barack Obama, also remembering Reid, saying that in the waning days and weeks of his life, Reid's wife reached out saying that it was hard for Reid to speak on the phone, but she wanted letters that she could read to him. Obama shared what letter he sent to Reid, and in part it read, "I wouldn't have been president had it not been for your encouragement and support, and I wouldn't have gotten most of what I got done without your skill and determination." Obama finished, "Most of all, you've been a good friend." Joe?
So, Ali, he served as majority leader for 8 years. It's one of the longest tenures ever. You talked about the Affordable Care Act, but what were some of the other highlights of his time?
Well, certainly the Affordable Care Act is one of them. The legislative prowess that it took to actually power that legislation through on the Hill is still something that lawmakers talk about here, especially as we look to the current political landscape as they try to do a similarly large package right now with Build Back Better. But he also helped to usher legislation through right after the Great Recession, economic in nature. He also referenced, though, that he spent a lot of time here working on bills and legislation really relating to the environment and land, seeing Nevada as one of those key states that was impacted by the changes brought by climate change. He's also someone, though, who changed Senate procedure, and it made him a polarizing figure. He's the person who made it so that you could put forth and vote on nominees by a simple majority. And it's also something that then extended, while Republicans did naysay that move in the moment, it's also something that extended, though, when they actually changed it to be a simple majority to confirm Supreme Court nominees. Many people looking at that Senate procedural change both now in light of the debate around the filibuster, but also because of the way that Supreme Court justices were confirmed during the Trump years.
And Allie, after he left the Senate in 2017, he still remained important to the Democratic Party, especially in his home state. We're tight on time here, but just tell us a little bit about his final years.
Well, look, he is someone who really created a political apparatus in Nevada that extends to the truest grassroots, the unions, as well as the state Democratic Party there. It was called the Reid machine in some circles because it was just so powerful. During the 2020 nominating contest, for example, I remember, and there have been pictures that have been posted in recent hours that remind me of this, presidential candidates going to greet him. They all had to speak with him. He was someone who you had to have on your side in Nevada politics. And he always would say that it was important to have the grassroots in your favor. So he created such an important political machine there in that state, and is a large part of the reason why we even have the Nevada caucuses as early in the calendar as we do right now, Joe.
A kingmaker in the minds of so many. Allie, thanks so much for your reporting this morning.
Truly.
Appreciate it. Another major loss this morning. The sports world is remembering the life of legendary NFL coach and broadcaster John Madden, an icon to generations of football fans. The Hall of Famer died yesterday at the age of 85. NBC News reporter Dan Sheneman takes a look back at his extraordinary career.
It's just super football. I mean, I love these kinds of games.
Although he never played a season of pro football, John Madden was synonymous with the NFL. After a knee injury ended his pro career during rookie training camp, he began to coach and was eventually named head coach of the Raiders at the age of just 33. He was young and he was a winner. His teams claimed 7 division titles and appeared in the playoffs 8 times. In 1976, his Raiders won Super Bowl 11. Madden was at the pinnacle of the NFL. But the stress of coaching caught up to him. Just 2 years after winning the Super Bowl, his Raiders failed to make the playoffs. He left Oakland as the youngest coach to win 100 games. When Madden stepped away from the sidelines, he stepped into the broadcast booth.
And emotion, John, is very much a part of this contest.
He was teamed with Pat Summerall for NFL games on CBS and later Fox. His voice was the soundtrack of NFL Sundays.
You can't make yourself one-dimensional against this defense.
Behind the mic, Madden could explain the game and connect with fans.
He had that great ability to make you want him come into your home and sit on the couch with you.
When Summerall retired, Madden moved on to Monday Night Football and later NBC's Sunday Night Football, where he was teamed with Al Michaels. Madden, who never liked to fly, traveled the country by bus. And when his bus arrived in town, it was an event.
Welcome back, everybody, here.
In 2006, after years of service to the game, John Madden was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame for his record as a coach.
You can't appreciate this any more than I do.
After 3 decades behind a microphone, Madden announced his retirement. He said, "It's time."
I strongly believe that this is the right time, this is the right thing, and you just do it.
To a generation of fans, Madden was not known as a coach or even as a broadcaster, but rather for a video game.
Bam! The blitz starts now.
Starting in 1988, Madden lent his name, voice, and personality to video game maker EA Sports. The Madden NFL series games were bestsellers and won Madden a new generation of fans. John Madden, a football life well lived. Dan Sheneman, NBC News.
Joining us now for more on John Madden's career is New York Times NFL writer Ken Belson. Ken, thanks for joining us this morning. We heard in the piece Madden coached the Raiders at a very young age because his playing career was cut so short. Why do you think he was so successful as a coach, even though he was so young?
Well, I think he kind of defined his era. You know, unlike Vince Lombardi, who, was a more dictatorial type, Madden was actually fit the 1960s, early 70s era where he gave players a lot of freedom to express themselves, but at the same time treated them like adults, and expected excellence from them. So he was kind of a pivotal figure in the coaching world in their approach to how players were treated.
Fans will remember Madden on Sundays calling games with fellow legendary broadcasters Pat Summerall, later Al Michaels. Tell us about that transition he made to television. I mean, was that a pretty natural transition for him? How did he make that?
Well, it turned out to be. It wasn't something he set out to do, but when he had a tryout with Bob Costas in Los Angeles to see if it would work, it was immediately clicked. He was a natural teacher. He was a great explainer. He had great enthusiasm, and he understood the game. He wasn't faking it. He knew how the offenses worked, how defenses worked, and he just wanted to convey that to people, and it came across really naturally. So he fit into it without realizing it initially, and of course, he made a 30-year career out of it.
It's interesting looking back how there are just these distinctive chapters to his career. There was the coaching era, then the broadcasting era, but there's a generation of fans who really know him mostly, perhaps totally, as the face of the iconic NFL video game franchise, John Madden football. What do you make of how someone as old school as Madden became this sort of video game entrepreneur?
Well, he was an entrepreneur at heart, and I think what makes the game great and Madden's contribution to it was he was a stickler for details. He could have had a video game sort of become just off the shelf, but every single year he wanted to improve the game, and he would bring software developers from EA to his home in California and literally go over how to improve the game. Now, he didn't understand the software necessarily, but he would try and get them to make the game more realistic. So, for instance, the offensive line, well, they don't score any points in these video games, but he wanted them to move just like offensive linemen do in real games. It didn't necessarily enhance the game other than aesthetics and make it more realistic. And software engineers who didn't necessarily know football had to translate his vision for the game into X's and O's. And that really was the hallmark of it. It's precision and it's realism.
Ken, love all the details you've given us about his life. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We do appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.